The U.S. Supreme Court is expected to rule next month on a case that could drastically change access to pornography in America. After hearing arguments earlier this term, the justices will likely decide on the legality of a Texas law requiring age verification for porn viewers. The law is being challenged by a nonprofit organization advocating on behalf of the industry. The Free Speech Coalition argues the law violates the free speech rights of adults who want to access mature content. Joining us now, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Christine Emba. She's the author of the book titled Rethinking Sex, a Provocation. She also wrote a recent piece for the New York Times entitled The Delusion of Porn's Harmlessness. Also with us for this discussion, special correspondent at Vanity Fair and host of the Fast Politics podcast, Molly Jong-Fast. Good to have you both. So, Christine, I'm so glad that you are diving into this topic. If you could tell us what the delusion is, that porn doesn't hurt anybody as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, but it really ultimately does have long-lasting effects on people who view it a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not a topic that I necessarily love writing about myself, but I do feel that it's important. In this moment, it seems as though there is sort of a mass delusion, especially among people who want to consider themselves, well-educated, modern, sort of liberal thinkers, that pornography is a private affair, that it is harmless entertainment for adults, and that it's not doing anything to our society, that, private things are kept private. But I think that most Americans, and honestly most individuals, know themselves that porn is not good for us. It hasn't been good for our society. It's certainly not good for the young people who are watching it almost constantly and for whom it has served as sort of their first education about sexuality and the way that they should relate romantically with others.
Well, I want to talk about that in a minute because that's so important, especially
now,
for those of us who have daughters, for those daughters' friends, and we've been hearing about this for years. But you made, I think, a really important point that sometimes people on the left who will write about how damaging pornography is don't want to walk through the door and say this is bad because it goes against sort of their feeling that people should be making decisions on. You say in that vacuum, you have people on the right, you have religious, those that are people of faith that are going out and saying this, but unfortunately gets too quickly discounted by elites. So talk about why it's important for people not just on the right, but those in the center and the left to really talk about the harm that this does to people individually and society as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to talk about it because only by talking about it can we figure out how to address it. In many cases, pornography is first of all, it's a vast cultural product that kind of infuses our media, infuses how we talk to each other, infuses our politics, changes the way that men and women relate. But because and I say this sort of general, we feel sort of nervous about embracing it, or rather embracing the conversation about it in public. We just sort of allow it to shape our imaginations, to shape our relationships without countering it in any way. So I think one of the best examples here about what the fear of talking about it does, keeping this delusion of harmlessness, is that, we don't educate young people about the fact that porn is not real, the fact that, watching false representations of sexuality, especially, porn today often focuses on misogynistic attitudes towards women. There's a lot of violence. It makes the porn that, older generations watch to look like, as one girl put it, an American Girl doll catalog. This does shape how we interact with people. It shapes how young men treat young women. It shapes how young women feel about dating young men. And this has implications for our future, for a loneliness crisis, for falling levels of, dating and relationships. But if we don't talk about it, we are not acknowledging the harms that it causes.
And for people that don't have younger children or children that are of an age to date, et cetera, they don't understand how much things have changed over the past 5 years, the past 10 years. You and I were reading an article a couple of years ago that we sent around and were shocked by, that some young men have to take Viagra because they're aroused by what they see on the screen, but not in real life. That is, so it's having an effect on these individuals. You're seeing these headlines that we're sending up about how it ruined people's lives, but it's undermining society as a whole, like the dating culture, everything.
Two things come to mind. Phones, first of all, which now has the possibility of young children, getting access to porn by mistake even. COVID, which had everybody locked up with their technology. And we talk, Christine, about the harms of porn. I would say that, isn't it fair to say it's addictive in a very dangerous way? And it can pull people in and cut them completely off from the rest of the world and make it very, very difficult to help them. And I'm trying to think of a parallel. And would a fair parallel be like alcohol? It's legal. You can drink it. But if you drink it every day, all day, you will be very sick and become addicted.
Right. I mean, and we're open to saying that about alcohol. We're open to saying this about cigarettes.
Right.
These are things that are available. You can do this if you want, but just know that it's not good for you. There's not necessarily like a safe and ethical version of smoking that we would recommend to children. But the points that you brought up are really key about how it warps, relationships in the real world. So first of all, you're right. I think smartphones are a huge changer of how pornography works in this moment, because unlike in the past, there are kids with smartphones who have pornography on their phones and accessible to them at all hours of the day or night. You can be watching porn on the bus. You could be watching it in school. There's sort of no way to escape from this access. And then there are a lot of kids who, because of the ease of access and their sort of always on internet life, stumble upon porn unawares when they're not necessarily ready to see something like that. The first age of porn exposure in the U.S. is something in the late, or rather in the early tweens, between 11 and 13 for most kids.
Yeah, Molly, that can't be overstated here. The fact that it's just so readily accessible now. Porn is not hard to get anymore. And in fact, it could be a child, innocently looking online on a line or a social media site, and the algorithms eventually get them there.
Yes, but I'm curious about the political calculus of this decision. So Trump has made huge inroads, or has made some inroads, I think is more fair, with younger people. So this doesn't strike me as a hugely popular move there. Can you talk me through some of the political calculations?
Yeah, it's interesting trying to figure out whether it is popular or not in this moment. I actually think that older adults tend to underestimate the level of despair that pornography and sort of a broken sexual landscape has brought to younger generations. So in polling in the 2024 election, actually most Americans were in favor of some kind of age restrictions or some ways of making porn more difficult to access for younger people. The only group that was actually sort of firmly opposed to this was, yes, young men. And that is a group that Trump has, tried and kind of succeeded in courting in this moment. But at the same time, if you are looking at the conversations that young people are having online, if you're looking at, what really popular, for instance, male podcasters like Theo Vaughn or Joe Rogan are saying, they're much more open in this moment about saying that, hey, I've struggled with pornography. This actually isn't good for me. I kind of wish my world was not suffused with this. So I think younger generations are actually more awake to the harms of pornography and are more open to seeing pornography become sort of less pervasive than, older voters, older adults might give them credit for.
Well, the new piece is online now for the New York Times. Senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Christine Emba, thank you. We really appreciate your writing this piece and coming on the show. Thank you very much.